There are all these like little sporadic ones throughout the end of the night, but those two big ones.
You don't need to be a member of law enforcement to understand or see why this foundational change to her story is extremely problematic. And yet, Nicole Kessinger was just getting warmed up.
Listen, if you've been in a car accident...
New information...
CBI.
So without further ado, let's begin. Don the power to investigate if the path...
She was like gone, and he didn't know where she was. And at that point, I don't think that it set off any alarms in my head, just because, I mean, I have friends that I text, and if I don't hear from them for like 3 hours or 6 hours or even like a couple days, I don't feel concerned about where they're at, because it's kind of a standard thing for me.
Just 10 seconds after her first lie to federal agents, Nicole Kessinger begins to explain that on Monday the 13th of August, the same day that Shannan and her children are reported missing, she was not concerned about Shannan's disappearance for the entirety of that day. She initially repeats this claim in her interview the following day with Detective Kobach.
What were you thinking at that time?
This was like on Monday. Again, at that point, I was like, I still thought she left. I mean, this was all on Monday. Like, I legitimately thought this woman left the premises with her kids and just wanted nothing to do with him for like 24 hours.
But halfway through that second interview, Detective Kobach tells her that he's going to need her cell phone records, which forces her to have to explain her late night, hours-long phone calls to Chris throughout Monday evening. And it's at this point, with this new information in hand, that Nicole radically alters the entirety of her prior statements.
Oh, and like I kept telling him I was scared. I was really freaking scared. In fact, that's another thing I'm missing. I'm so tired. Monday night, like, I called him back in the middle of the night because I could not sleep. I could not sleep at all. And I remember when I called him, he sounded like he was sleeping. And I was like, how the hell can you sleep right now? That's exactly what I said to him. And he was just like, I'm just kind of dozing off and on the couch. And I just remember thinking, like, I haven't shut my eyes yet. And this is not even my family. And so that happened on Monday night.
Yeah, well, all those phone calls at the very end of the night, that was me freaking out. Like, if you look at my texts, a lot of that was like, I can't sleep, I'm really scared, where's your family? That was like me freaking out, and him calling to like try to reassure me, or me calling him like, please talk to me, I'm super scared, where's your family? Like, those little ones at the very end of the night are me not being able to sleep and trying to get him to like talk to me about like, and just, I guess, making sure everything was okay. So that those like real late ones, and that's why they're all kind of like sporadic, because I'd be up for like an hour, and then I'd fall asleep for like 15 minutes, and then I would like wake up and start stressing again and try to call him back. Like, so that's why there are all these like little sporadic ones throughout the end of the night. But those two big ones.
You don't need to be a member of law enforcement to understand or see why this foundational change to her story is extremely problematic. And yet, Nicole Kessinger was just getting warmed up.
Listen, if you've been in a car accident, don't call an attorney. Use this AI app instead. That's what I did, and that's how I got this $140,000 check in less than 30 seconds.
Nicole repeatedly tried to downplay the serious nature of her relationship with Chris, and did so despite the mountain of evidence that completely contradicts those claims.
Was he in love with you? Were you in love with him?
I think it could have gotten there had things played out like in a decent manner.
Now, it's important to remember that if we use Nicole's own statements for that specific moment in time, she was already well aware that Shannan and her children were missing. So the claim that her relationship with Chris was little more than casual dating is laughably untrue. Wouldn't someone who is actually concerned with assisting law enforcement, someone who claims to have nothing to hide, want to tell the truth to assist in their investigation? Because if she really had nothing to hide, then why say this?
Did he say anything to you?
So, Gen X. Oh, there's this slightly little, little thing that's just, it's the weirdest thing. They as in him and his daughter, have seemingly just been wiped from the internet, and there's been no sightings, there's no digital footprint, no social media, no neighbors, no friends from high school, no cousins, no sisters, nobody. Just poof, disappeared. Weird, huh? Very weird. Obviously, because there would be no way to prove this anyway, but there is rumors and buzz that he's got ties to the Freemasons. And, I've looked into that enough to where I'm uncomfortable looking any further. And, so it's not like they keep a roster and, you can find publicly, but that is a rumor that has been very popular. But it's very strange, because if she was in witness protection, there would have to have been a trial, and she would have had to go on stand and testify and been a witness. And according to her, she wasn't there. She didn't see anything, and there was no trial. So, and she got a name change. Nicole did. Yeah. Oh, you don't even know, girl. You better buckle up, Buttercup. It is like this case is the only. It was open and closed all the way from the time that the murders were committed until the time the case was closed, sealed, and Chris was sentenced and shipped off to prison, from August to November. So barely 90 days. 90 days. It usually takes longer than that. I mean, Brenner, just to put in perspective, Brenner still hasn't even been to his first arraignment yet. And it's been a year. Think about that. Kaylee, didn't she use her son's cell phone data for proof she wasn't there, but that was her son? Her son? I'm confused. She doesn't have any kid. Nicole? Yes, I have a playlist, Gen X. I would highly recommend it. Just if you need something to watch in your free time. I think it's got like 30-something videos, so obviously, probably not all in one sitting. But I think I even have turned it into a podcast too. I don't know what that means, if it makes it any different, but the option was lit up, so I clicked it. Before I push play, I'm waiting on IYQ too, because I'm confused. Have you ever seen this one you are now watching? I have, so I don't want to say anything. No, I started. Well, let me see how far we're into it. I got about 5 more minutes into it, and I decided I was gonna react to it, so I just stopped it and was like, I'll save this and watch it with you guys, so that it's not like more natural reactions. So I can be like, oh my god. No, I'm just kidding. I have time. I'm retired. Who are they looking in the garage window? Oh, that was the other Nicole. Okay, but let me clear that up. Okay, so there's a Nicole Kessinger, which is the mistress of Chris, and then there's Nicole Atkinson, which is Shannan's best friend that dropped her off that night after they got in back from the work trip, and she's the one that sounded off the alarm whenever Shannan wasn't answering the phone and missed her ultrasound appointment the next morning, so she just showed up at the house and called the police for a welfare check. So NA and NK, Nicole Kessinger, which is the one on screen right now, the succubus as Ruben calls her, and then NA, Nicole Atkinson, is Shannan's best friend. We all call them mistress hookers, so we don't. Okay, yeah, I can do that too. Either way, succubus, hooker, and we'll call the good one. We'll give her the decency to call her Nicole, because this one changed her name anyway. So. Well, that Nicole used her son's cell phone data to show she wasn't there. Huh? Did she? I feel like I remember looking at hers and Nick's both Life 360, but I'd have to go back and look. That's interesting. But she was. She was where? She wasn't there? Huh. That's interesting. I'm gonna write that down. I'm gonna look into that IYQ too. There's still things that I have that when I go back and look again, the discovery documents, there's so much of it. I went back and reread them several times, and every time I've missed like a bajillion things that I didn't see the first time. So that could be one of the things that I just completely blew right past, because Nikki, Nicole, if I could have just completely overlooked that, it wouldn't surprise me. Yes, you can see it via the T&T lady I have been telling you about. Ah, okay. Okay. Interesting.
You about where he thought the relationship was going to be going, or what he was hoping for the future.
I think that he was looking for a relationship with me, but I knew that he was in the process of a separation.
As we've learned in previous episodes, Detective Michael Prill's data report proved beyond any shadow of a doubt that the statements Nicole Kessinger just made are intentional.
1925 hours, Kessinger searched Google on topics related to marrying your mistress. 2154 hours, Shannan told Utoft and Cassie Rosenberg, he said we are not compatible anymore. He refused to hug me, said he thought another baby would fix his feelings, said he refused couples counseling.
Fabrications. She routinely threw tantrums when Chris had to pay attention to his family, including becoming irate when he went with his family on vacation to North Carolina. Despite her inference that their relationship was little more than casual, she told Chris that she would give birth to his first son. Her Google searches further betray her attempts at deception. Birth to his first son. Her
I don't think that it was
misdirect.
I mean, 3 hours. I have friends a couple days. I don't feel
interview, but the web of deceptions and misdirections that Nicole was weaving to his first.
His relationship with Kessinger contributed to the murders, but she never asked him to do anything. Kessinger never knew if she wanted to have kids, but she told him she wished she could give him a son. And these are highlighted from the discovery. So these are, I'm assuming Kobach notes from the conversation that they had.
Son. Her Google searches further betray her attempts at deception and prove that she was completely enamored with him.
August 3rd, 2018, 21:23 hours. Watts transferred images of Kessinger into his secret calculator application. August 4th, 2018, 0:45 hours. For over 2 hours, Kessinger searched Google for wedding dresses. So that would have been 9 days before the murders. 10 days and 9 days.
Him, which is precisely why she routinely sent him nude images on a near daily basis.
2300 hours. Watts transferred images of Kessinger, some semi-nude, into his calculator, his secret calculator application. August 10th, 2018, Watts took the day off from work and Shannan left for Arizona.
Sending Chris these lewd images even when she knew he was with his family.
Hence, this is why we call her the hooker. 10:38 hours. Watts transferred images of Kessinger to include a full nude selfie to his secret calculator application. 12:36 hours through 14:21 hours. Shannan made 4 unanswered calls to Watts.
It's obvious to anyone paying any attention that Nicole's downplaying of her relationship with a married man was and is nothing more than a deliberate deception.
So when we spent time together, I didn't really go to his house. We would spend time at my house.
Were you ever at his house? Once. Okay.
Okay, everyone. Time for...
As was the case with most lies that Nicole Kessinger would tell, the substance of the lie never lasts for long. This is a
You're talking about devil's breath, IYQ2. Sorry, I thought you were talking about the oxy. But no, that's devil's breath, what you're talking about. That's some scary stuff right there. It's like a date rape roofie type thing, except way, way stronger because apparently only a little of it, and it doesn't knock you unconscious. You're still conscious, but you're like a zombie and you don't have any control over your thoughts or what you're doing. So people in it's real popular over there in Colombia. People will get robbed and go empty their bank accounts and give them people all their jewelry, and then when they come back to, they have no record, they don't remember anything and they have nothing left, and there's nothing you can really do because you don't remember anything. It's actually really scary. But they make it with a plant that grows over there specifically, but you have to do something with it, obviously, to make it that happen. But it's I watched a documentary on it, and it's just as common over there in Colombia, as getting a bag of cocaine. It's, if not more, because it's how they make money over there. Can you mail? Sure. Just, don't let the wind blow whenever you open it. Be careful with it. I want that on my conscience. Yeah, flower. A really pretty flower. It's hooked up. Yes, tourist. Yep. that it's really popular with tourists because, that they're coming with money, or they know they're coming with money. It is very, very, very potent. You don't have to put it in the drink or anything. You can just take it and blow it in your hand because it's a powder, and that's all. And somebody breathe it in. That's it.
Especially true when Agent Kobach tells Nicole at their first meeting that he has already subpoenaed her phone records.
The only reason I ask, and I'm not really concerned about your location. I think we already have your cell phone records. At some point, did Mark ask you to supply? Did they ask for consent to get cell phone records? That'll probably be done by warrant. If we wanted,
what you just did?
Nope. What I'm talking about is your movement.
And it's at this moment that we see the mark of a seasoned pathological liar backed into a corner, coming to the realization that her lies are about to become obvious. So by the time the second interview ends, she reframes her prior testimony and informs Agent Kobach that in fact she had been to Chris's house more than once. And no matter how many times I replay these interviews, I am never able to withhold my shock and dismay at law enforcement's apparent refusal to ask any follow-up questions or to ever inquire as to why Nicole's statements have consistently and substantively changed at every new interaction. But the one constant with Nicole that persists through every recorded exchange is her incessant inability to tell the truth, and that character flaw is about to take center stage.
And did you guys, was there anything else that you did? Was it just dinner? Did you go anyplace else? Visit any other?
No, we just went to dinner. That's one of the only times I've actually ever been out in public with him.
Standing in the park with the FBI and her father, Dwayne, Nicole has been providing her initial statement for less than 10 minutes, and she has already told no less than 5 provable lies. Because as we know, and as law enforcement should have known, her visit to the Lazy Dog restaurant was absolutely not one of the only times that she went out in public with Chris Watts. In fact, she won't actually tell the truth about the multitude of times that they were out in public together until several weeks later, when again she finds out that Agent Kobach has just received a detailed summary of her cell phone records. And the proof that Nicole was deeply concerned about the clearly false statements that she was making to law enforcement is absolutely everywhere.
I don't really know what to do. I feel like if I talk to them, they're either going to try to find some holes in my story or try to get me to be Chris's only ally, and I don't really feel like dealing with either one of those.
But easily the most damning lie that Nicole told during the course of her interactions with law enforcement is what ultimately convinced me that she is hiding something truly monstrous with respect to her involvement in this case.
So I talked to him on Sunday night, and he was fine on Sunday night. I didn't have any issues with him.
The first time Nicole is asked about Chris the night before he committed his crimes, she very clearly denies that she noticed anything suspicious about his behavior that night. In fact, the following day, she repeats the same sentiment, nearly verbatim.
Anything important that you recall during that conversation about the children, about his wife, about what he was doing the next day, what he had planned, anything like that? Did he tell you any of that information?
I remember he told me he had to go to the field and not to the office on Monday morning.
Okay. Did he specifically say where he needed to go on Monday morning?
No, I don't ask him for those sites. There's Anadarko's got thousands of sites. If he were to tell me, I wouldn't even
They're just random numbers and stuff, right?
Well, he told me, he said, I got to go to a site. I got to go check out like a valve or something where they think that they had a release, something like that.
Did he mention the town or anywhere?
No, he just told me that that's what he had to go do. He's like, he was like, I won't see you in the office in the morning. Because I see him, but I don't actually like talk to him. Like, I will go in the cafeteria, I will put my lunch in the fridge, and him and his whole team are sitting in there, and I don't talk to any of them. I just walk out. But anyways, yeah, he's like, so I won't see you, I'm going to the field, which is not an uncommon thing for the ops guys to like just go straight to the field. Like, it happens. Like, typically they go to the office, I would say like 3 or 4 days a week, but there are days where him and his other team members are not there, or like I'll get in there and some days the cafeteria is packed and they're all there. Okay. And other days I get in there and there's only like 3 or 4 of them.
So it didn't cause you any concern that he said, I'm going to the field on Monday, I won't see you. That wasn't...
No.
That's happened before.
The words Nicole just spoke are not ambiguous statements. She is very clearly and in no uncertain terms stating that she was fine with Chris on Sunday night. She's explaining that his comments about going to the field first thing Monday morning were normal and in no way caused her any alarm. But as usual, less than a week later, she radically alters the entirety of her prior statements and manufactures one of the most ostentatious and grandiose fabrications I have heard in the entirety of my career. Nicole Kessinger comes up with this fantastical excuse for why she did actually have a problem with Chris and why she eventually confronted him about this never-before-mentioned problem. A problem that she has already vehemently denied having with him on 2 separate occasions in her statements to law enforcement, but now is telling a story where she is demanding proof from Chris Watts that he was at Survey 319, evidence that she demanded via text by telling him to prove it, to prove where he was in the form of a picture of the well site, the same well site where he had just disposed of his entire family. Proof that she had never once mentioned to law enforcement previously, material evidence on her cell phone in connection to a quadruple homicide that she now expects law enforcement to believe was completely innocent, despite not providing any reason for why her story has completely changed. And despite this shocking revelation, this earth-shattering news that law enforcement's own protected witness has just given them, implicating herself in asking their main suspect for proof of the crime scene where he disposed of his entire family, a picture that places the primary suspect at the crime scene containing all of the evidence he is attempting to hide. We in fact learned that at no point in the entirety of the discovery file was there any follow-up, any questions, any inquiries, anything whatsoever that could even begin to approach due diligence on the part of law enforcement. But as usual, Nicole Kessinger's lies were far from over.
Increase your profit and work less time with Kittle, a genius new AI tool which is...
I think I met him sometime in June, probably early June. It might have been May. It was just talking at work. It was pretty casual. And he didn't have a wedding ring on his finger. And every time I talked to him, he didn't tell me that he was in a relationship. He didn't even mention his kids right away either.
Did he mention the children's name or his significant other's name?
I didn't know his significant other's name for a while.
One of the most common misconceptions that people have about this case is concerning Nicole Kessinger's Google searches. Because of bad reporting and outright misinformation, many people incorrectly believe that Nicole's Google searches for Chris and Shannan Watts were not conducted in 2017.
So, the Google searches. She was searching not Chris, Shannan Watts on Facebook and on Google like 6 months before she even started working at Anadarko. And according to her, she didn't know who Chris was until she started working at Anadarko. So why are you looking up his wife before you know him? And why are you pretending like you don't know her name when you were Googling it? It's very, very, very odd that Rourke specifically would come out and publicly say, oh, it was probably a typo. Well, you do realize you're the one in charge of releasing this shit. You're not even doing fucking spell check and checking it for typos before you release it? Like, how unprofessional can your lie make you sound, my guy? Like, a typo my ass. What was it supposed to say? Schnoodle? I mean, a typo meant like it was supposed to be part of the other redacted shit. That's probably what he meant. I digress.
2017, but in 2018 because of this news article. However, the Weld County District Attorney Michael Rourke confirmed himself that Nicole did in fact search for Chris and Shannan several months before she ever worked at Anadarko, over half a year before she claims she ever met Chris Watts. So her claim that she didn't know Shannan's name is a complete and utter fabrication, and once again a lie that was never followed up by any member of law enforcement throughout the entire
Pineapple juice. Okay, this says we did not get... Okay, let me go back to the other one. Okay, this says the record supervisor at the Frederick... Okay, this was on December 6th at 5:11 p.m. I'm assuming 2019. The record supervisor at the Frederick Police Department told Crime Online on Thursday that the entry in the discovery report showing that Nicole Kessinger performed a Google search for Shannan Watts on September 1st, 2017 is a typo. Then this one says, it's not a typographical error in the report. The detectives are reporting what was contained in the data from her phone. I don't know the answer to the question or why or how those dates ended up in her phone. Several searches for Christopher Watts can be found prior to 8/12/18. These entries appear to have been deleted. I searched for the numbers, blah, 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 and found no results. I did locate names searches for Chris Watts dated back to August 3rd, 2017, and Shannan Watts dating back to January 7th of 2018. These entries were deleted but were recoverable. Wow. Let's keep going. September 1st, 2017, Kessinger searched the internet for the name Shannan Watts. We did not get to the point in our investigation of attempting to independently verify that or not because Chris Watts pled guilty, Rourke said. When you ask me if I have verified that information, the answer to your question is no. Nicole Kessinger told us that she met and started the relationship with the defendant in 2018. So where that anomaly in the data comes from, I can't answer it for you. I don't know the answer to it. Rourke said that prosecutors are confident in the result of the murder investigation, which is closed. What the freak? French toast. Okay, I'm not even going to get on a rant. Not yet. We got plenty more time.
entirety of this investigation as confirmed by DA Michael Rourke, but easily one of the most disconcerting confirmed by
I have absolutely no reason to... Oh my God. Okay. Here we go, y'all. I have absolutely no reason to investigate Nicole Kessinger at this point in time. He said, this is not a witch hunt. You motherfucker. You little weasel. Here we go with his arrogant My job is to investigate and prosecute who was responsible for the deaths of Shannan, Bella, Celeste, and Nico. We have done that. I have no information nor any belief that any other criminal defendant is out there who is responsible for their death in any way, shape, or form. The Frederick Police Department did not immediately respond to a request for clarification of their earlier statements about the phone data review.
By DA Michael Rourke. But easily one of the most disconcerting lies that Nicole Kessinger ever spoke is one that speaks to her character most of all.
She ever came up in conversation, he was very, civil about her. He never had anything, negative or derogatory to say about her.
And to be honest with you, I mean, there were several discussions that we had about his current relationship and where it had gone and what it had caused. And he talked about his kids from time to time, but the thing is he was never hostile. It was never anything aggressive. Even when he spoke of his wife and the fact that they were separating, it was never ill. It was still very kind. It was just this is not working, and would explain why, but it wasn't anything.
Okay, I'm going to back this up a couple of frames, and I'm going to make it full screen for a second. Watch her dad's hands, and watch her eyes keep cutting over there. The reason I wouldn't even notice it if she wouldn't cut her eyes over at him every couple of seconds. That's what makes me notice it. And then when I see his hands moving, that's all I can see. Watch this, y'all.
Ill. It was still very kind. It was just this is not working, and would explain why, but it wasn't anything out of the ordinary or anything that I think would scare me. And to this day, even after everything that I found out, I still look back at that and I don't see any red lights with the way that he spoke of his family.
In the early days of this investigation, Nicole was careful to avoid saying anything overtly negative about Shannan, even claiming that Chris never said anything negative or damaging about Shannan either. But within a few short weeks, Kessinger completely changes that narrative again and pivots to outright
In person, asked Chris Watts when he and Shannan had decided to separate. He told me late March, early April 2018. I asked if he still lived with her, and he told me yes. She said that when she was home, he slept in a different room, and when she was gone, he would occasionally sleep in the master bedroom, but not frequently because the bed was uncomfortable. I asked why he had decided to separate from Shannan Watts. Chris Watts told me that Shannan Watts was bossy. I asked what he meant by bossy. Chris Watts responded that she was controlling, said that they really don't agree. They don't argue much, though. She said that once, many years ago, he attempted to stand his ground with her, and she told him to get out of the house and made him leave for the night. Chris Watts said that he tried to avoid arguments ever since then. Said that now, if him and Shannan disagreed, she would make nasty comments to him, and he would just ignore them.
Slandering Shannan's character.
Conversations with Chris Watts while Chris Watts was in North Carolina. Phone. Chris Watts tells me that he had a conversation with his buddy Mark, who lives in San Diego. Says Mark informed him that many years ago he believes that Shannan Watts was responsible for a large amount of money that was embezzled from a company that Shannan Watts and Mark both worked for at the time, but that the company was never able to prove who did it.
and her memory. But everything you just heard, taken directly from law enforcement's interviews and evidence, does.
I asked if she talked like that in front of his kids. He said yes. My kids started to repeat her words, and that is why I wanted the separation. Asked him what he said to his kids when they repeated Shanann Watts' words. Chris Watts said he would tell his children that it was not nice to say that to anybody. I asked Chris Watts if Shanann Watts was bossy in front of his friends. Chris Watts said that Shanann Watts was all about appearance in all aspects of her life, but that in front of her friends she was occasionally bossy, but she would turn it into kind of a joke so that it was more discreet.
Doesn't even begin to scratch the surface of the number of problems that exist with Nicole's statements to police, or the problematic issues that exist with her possible connections to these crimes. From Nicole's cell phone pinging in Frederick.
Okay, this is the goods, Okay, so this is Nicole Kessinger's phone bill activity, like from, I think, Verizon. Okay, so this is obviously not the first page because it says talk activity continued, but you see the date right here, over here in this little margin, starts on the 12th. Then the next margin it says time, and then the next thing it says number, and then the origination, which means where the call came from, like where it was at, and then the destination, like where the person you're calling was at, how minutes, how long the interaction took place, and then that's it. So the first one is August 12th, 9:28 p.m. To 9. So the blue is, I'm assuming, Watts. Yeah. So to Chris, she was in Thornton, Colorado, and it was an incoming call, and they talked for 111 minutes. Okay, this is the night before, a few hours before Shanann gets home, and supposedly, according to Chris, he unalives them. Okay. August 13th, morning of the murders, 6:16 a.m. This number right here, this is Jim's number. Leave Jim alone. Okay. She's in Frederick, Colorado. Not Thornton, where she lives. In Frederick, Colorado, where Chris lives. At 6:16 in the morning, which is right when according to the timeline in the DA, right whenever he's unaliving his family, or when he's loading them up, to say the least. And the call went to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which is Jim. But I don't know that that's true. That might just be where his phone is registered to, because according to what she said, Jim was at her apartment. So that should say Thornton, and that should say Thornton. They should be together. Why are you calling him? And why are you in Frederick? And why is he in not? And what has happened? This just fucked everything you set up, lady. Moving on. August 13th, 2:28 p.m. I don't know this number. Yeah, that's not Chris's number. She's in Platteville, which is where the Anadarko office is at. And incoming call. 3 minutes. Okay, by the way, she was only on the phone with Jim for a minute. Okay, August 13th. Now we're at 2:35, so we're about 7 minutes after the last time. She's in the same place. So whoever this is calling her. 3 minutes the first time, now 1 minute. August the 13th, now about an hour later, 3:32. Different. That's Jim again. She's at home. Brighton. Well, no, she's probably heading home. And he's in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. 6 minutes. About an hour after that, August 13th, 4:48 p.m. That same number from the 2:30 and 2:28. Now she's at home because she's in Thornton, and she gets an incoming call, and she talks for 4 minutes. Who is that? Okay. August 13th, so about 20 minutes later, 5:01. Chris, she's at home, and there's a voicemail deposit So, at 1 minute. A minute later. What? That must be where. Okay. Because this is North Carolina, so that just must be like where the phone is registered to. Because that's weird. Oh, okay. 1 minute. August 13th, 9:48 p.m. So 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 4 hours. Incoming call, 50 minutes. What? Okay, and then 11:09, so 10, about 2 hours. And then they talk for another 52 minutes. Okay. Back and on my computer. She said she was so hated she changed her name. I didn't know that. Was just reading that. Wow. Yeah, the judge just gave her a name change, and she's just poof. No sightings of her. No, I mean it's amazing. After all this time, you'd think somebody'd see her at the grocery store, or they'd be a classmate or just somebody. Not a single soul. It's the strangest thing I think I've ever looked into. I'm serious. Like, it's 2024.
Near the
Let
home
me
of
just say
Chris
this.
Watts at 6.
It's 2024, man. It is almost, I'm not going to say impossible because they've done it, but it's very hard to not leave a digital footprint. And when I tell you there's nothing, no social media, no nothing, like, I don't know how they got to be in the Stone Ages or I can't make it make sense. It's weird.
6:16 a.m. the morning of August 13th, placing her in the correct time and proximity of when and where Chris committed his crimes, including her vehicle being seen by witnesses in the neighborhood.
Anything different over the last, 2 days, 3 days? Odd vehicles, odd noises, odd lights?
There was a truck out here yesterday. In fact, that's why I thought you were here yesterday. Maybe someone complained about that I hadn't seen before.
What type of truck?
It was kind of almost a steel gray. Okay. Don't ask me, make.
Okay.
Year.
The footage that many believe shows her silhouette while Chris was preparing to dispose of his family. Her cell phone.
Okay. It says, okay, everyone is questioning whether or not he had help. Okay, y'all look at this picture very closely. The left one would be him, and the one on the right is a woman. Because right at the light is her head, and right below are her breasts, and you do see long hair. You have to look closely, no doubt. I feel like, oh, okay. Interesting.
Wet while Chris.
That's interesting too.
Was preparing to dispose of his family. Her cell phone records, her elusive friend Jim, her failure to account for her whereabouts.
It looks the same to you, Eddie? You know what? I got a video for y'all, or for us. All right, 24:50. We'll be right back to this. It's relevant, and I do what I want. Sorry. Here it is. Let me make it big. Okay, so you think they're the same? You do? You really do, Eddie? I don't. I think the posture, the walk, everything about the is just different to me. Yeah, you are crazy. Yeah, watch Eddie.
I'll be right back, right?
Yeah, you see definitely a female. Yeah, and like what Kathy was saying, see the butt? Or no, that's her purse. Oh shit. Do you see it?
person walks this black area here, this is the toddler's hair, whatever, and like they're going into all this crazy detail, and this white thing is the purse. That white thing is Chris's hand. Like, I don't understand how people have managed to get on board this train. And never mind, there is not a garage. Chris and that gas can against the law. People want to understand what's logical. Now I'm not so sure. I got to be honest, I'm not so
To the home.
person. This
Into the oxy. Phone calls and her connection to the oxycodone that Chris used to try and force Shannan's miscarriage.
steel gray. Don't ask me, Nate.
Okay.
Year.
The footage that many believe shows her silhouette while Chris was preparing to dispose of his family. Her cell phone records, her elusive
Year.
the footage that many of his family, her cell phone records, her elusive afternoon of the crimes, her suspicious phone calls, and her connection to the oxycodone that Chris used to try and force Shannan's miscarriage. The list goes on and on. Since posting the first video covering Nicole Kessinger in August of this year, over 2.5 million people have viewed and commented on this series that I needed to do more to show the definitive evidence proving Nicole's culpability, demonstrating the breadth of the lies that she told. I placed on my shoulders the responsibility of answering a question, inconsistencies with Nicole's statements to law enforcement. Then why didn't they properly and thoroughly investigate her possible involvement? After weeks and months of going down every imaginable rabbit hole in this case, I stumbled onto something that I believe is the answer to that question. And what I'm about to show you will explain why the only way you...
Okay, guys. This shit's about to take a hard left turn. And, put your seatbelt on, buckle up, Buttercup, because, it's about to get a whole lot of... Rourke is a weasel.
Switch to the Google Fi.
You're on. And thoroughly investigate her possible involvement. After weeks and months of going down every imaginable rabbit hole in this case, I stumbled onto something that I believe is the answer to that question. And what I'm about to show you will explain why the only way you can properly understand how Nicole Kessinger was allowed to brazenly lie to law enforcement without any repercussions. You must first understand the history of the one and only person responsible for making that decision. Because the reality is, there is only one singular reason why all of this information has been summarily ignored, rejected, and labeled as nothing more than a witch hunt. And if you truly want to know the reason why, then you first have to understand a different case entirely. On the morning of October 19, 1995, Tina Tor Sandoval left her shift at Colorado Medical Center, where she worked as a well-respected registered nurse. She was loved by her peers and was viewed as a consummate professional by everyone who knew and loved her, from her colleagues, her patients, and most importantly, her family. At that point of her life, Tina was in the final steps of finishing a contentious divorce, and earlier that day, her soon-to-be ex-husband, John Sandoval, had asked her to come over to his house to discuss some tax issues related to their divorce proceeding. In the years prior to their divorce, Tina's husband had been implicated in a number of crimes throughout the greater Denver area. John Sandoval was well known to local law enforcement, and it's been said that any time a crime was reported related to the harassment or stalking of women, Sandoval's name was attached to the list of likely suspects. Shortly after leaving work, Tina called her sister Susan and told her of her reluctant plan to meet with Sandoval late that same morning. Tina explained that she would call her sister later that afternoon to confirm that she was okay after her meeting with her.
So, my theory on the whole thing is kind of changed a little bit, but for the most part, I believe, because I was listening to, yeah, because by the way, this is a re-upload. I had to like edit out a bunch of stuff because YouTube was being a fun police, and that's why there's two of me right now, so don't freak out. But they as in they just closed this case. Like, there's so many discrepancies and things that are easily vettably just simply not true, and it's very strange that they just didn't care to look further into it. Like, for example, Troy McCoy, which is Chris's coworker, said that Chris took the day off work on Friday for the purposes of taking Shannan to the airport for the trip that she took to Arizona with her work. But Nicole Atkinson says that she picked Shannan up and took her to the airport. They rode together because they were going to the work convention together. Now, I believe that makes more sense, because if they were going at this, they were going anyway, why would she not ride with her? And if that was who brought her home, it seems like, they rode to the airport together and from the airport. So Chris took off from work on Friday and had the car all day long. And first of all, never took Shanann to the airport, because according to Nicole Atkinson, she picked Shanann up for the airport at 4:30 in the morning, and they caught a flight at 7. So what the hell was he doing all day? And he had the girls, because Troy said at 3:30 when they met in the parking lot to exchange the fire stick that the girls were both in the back seat, and he was driving the white Lexus. So there's a lot that he could have did Friday as far as prepping, like getting, there's no way that Monday morning, between the time that and the time that he got to that oil site and the time that Troy got, I mean, there's only literally like a 20, maybe 40-minute gap before Troy gets there. And you're telling me he's already killed the girls, put them in the holes, and dug the hole and put Shanann in it, and he didn't even look like he was sweaty or tired or breathing heavy? I call total bullshit. I just don't believe it. There's no way. It's just not humanly possible. He's not freaking Superman. No way. Not by himself. I digress.
Her soon-to-be ex-husband. Susan agreed and nervously watched the clock, attentively waiting for Tina's call. Hours passed, but the call never came, and to make matters worse, Tina had previously told her family that if anything ever happened to her, to tell law enforcement to look at her husband, John Sandoval, because he had threatened her life on numerous prior occasions. Her family immediately began calling Sandoval, demanding to know where Tina was, but to no avail. He claimed to not have seen her since that morning. Right away, Tina's family contacted the Greeley Police Department, who sprang into action. Within hours, they located Tina's car, parked just 4 blocks away from Sandoval's home. Wasting no time, they brought in cadaver dogs, which would confirm their worst fears. The dogs hit on the driver's side of Tina's car, and almost immediately, they found a trail. A scent trail that led directly back to the home of John Sandoval. By the time law enforcement arrived at Sandoval's house, he was nowhere to be found. He had completely disappeared, so that evening, law enforcement began a surveillance operation at his home, eagerly waiting for his return. At the time, they didn't have sufficient probable cause to enter his home, so they needed to catch him with some kind of tangible evidence that could prove whatever he had done with Tina. 5 hours later, John Sandoval came home. Law enforcement would eventually get the green light, and they secured his arrest for an unrelated outstanding warrant. After his arrest, they conducted a search of his vehicle, and inside of it they would find a shovel covered in sand and mud, a bucket, a plastic bag, a level, a flashlight, and a handgun. But despite the enormity of the circumstantial evidence that law enforcement had gathered against Sandoval, they were faced with a seemingly impossible uphill battle against a seasoned and weathered criminal who understood the justice system all too well. Law enforcement was lacking a crime scene, any forensic evidence, a weapon linked to the crime, a confession, but most importantly, the whereabouts or the remains of Tina Tor. Despite what appeared to be a strong circumstantial case, the reality was that without more evidence, this case would change to a new status within the homicide unit, one that would shatter the heart of Tina's entire family while denying them the justice they so clearly deserved. But even though Tina Tor's file was now considered a cold case, this story was far from over. Detective Michael Prill of the Greeley Police Department had been assigned to work the Tina Tor case and was particularly affected by the outcome when it went cold. Unwilling to allow the case to languish any further, he took it upon himself to seek justice on behalf of the Tor family. A decade after Tina's disappearance, Detective Prill made the choice to focus his attention on John Sandoval, a man who had successfully evaded any form of accountability from the justice system. And Detective Prill was in luck, because one of his closest friends and colleagues happened to be in a position to make the call to prosecute Sandoval, and that friend was the Honorable District Attorney, Michael J. Rourke. Prill and Rourke had been close friends for many years, but this was about justice and going after a man who had evaded it for far too long. So Prill brought the case file to Rourke and presented the body of the circumstantial evidence they had in support of Sandoval's criminality, connecting him to Tina's disappearance. And by the time Detective Prill was done pleading his case, DA Rourke made the decision to prosecute John Sandoval for the premeditated homicide of Tina Tor Sandoval. But this would be one of the only times in the history of the criminal justice system that a case was being brought forward with no confession, no weapon, no crime scene, no forensic evidence, and no remains. While the circumstantial evidence was strong, the prosecution was faced with the daunting task of trying to convict a man with no direct evidence tying him to the crime, let alone proof that a crime had even taken place. Securing a conviction would have to be a delicate balance between following the rules that govern the entirety of our judicial process and ensuring that Sandoval was prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. And whether DA Rourke liked it or not, he would have to closely follow the rules that protected even the likes of a monster like John Sandoval. A line can be drawn from the travesty of justice that was the homicide of Tina Tor and the eventual outcome of the Chris Watts case. And what I'm about to show you directly impacts the reason that I believe that Nicole Kessinger was allowed to make a mockery of the entire justice system and everything that it supposedly stands for.
Making a text-only design used to take hours of hard work trying to figure out how to get the right adjustment.
On April 12th of this year, a fairly new true crime podcast released its 11th episode entitled Prosecutorial Vicarious Trauma. And the special guest for that episode would be the Honorable Michael J. Rourke, the Weld County District Attorney and prosecutor for the Chris Watts case. In that episode, we learned that one of the co-hosts, Kimberly Corbin, is actually the wife of DA Michael Rourke. But it's what they discuss in this episode that is nothing short of unbelievable.
Yeah, I found out the hard way. Bella and Celeste were, like I said, 3- and 4-year-old little girls with very long, glowing blonde hair who liked to run around the living room, dance, sing, and do cartwheels. We knew that because we had some social media posts that Shannan had put on her Facebook page or Instagram, one of them, and so I watched those.
At the beginning of the episode, we are given a summary of DA Rourke's professional work history and what led to his eventual appointment as the DA by the governor of Colorado. After conducting research into his campaign records, I was able to learn that DA Rourke has run unopposed in his position as the Weld County DA for the last 2 election cycles, in 2016 and in 2020, respectively. In fact, he only needed to raise $7,780 to secure his successful bids as the elected politically conservative DA in the conservative district of Weld County. And to be clear, I'm not making a disparaging political statement, but a factual one. However, DA Rourke doesn't shy away from his very openly political views, both present day and in the past.
Mr. Wren and I flew out to North Carolina about 3 weeks ago and spent quite a bit of time with the Rourke family talking about the state of the death penalty in Colorado, the realities of the death penalty. We explained to them the extraordinary delays that currently exist in the state of Colorado as the result of, in part, the actions of our current governor. Of course, left a vacancy in the district attorney's office since he was midterm, and I had to go through the formal process of trying to have the governor of Colorado appoint me, which was touch and go, a little bit nerve-wracking because he is of a very different political party and very different political view from me and most of Weld County.
But it's in this episode that we hear from DA Rourke concerning two specific cases that he describes as having caused him and his staff vicarious trauma. And the very first case he chooses to discuss is the homicide of Tina Tor, a case where DA...
Oh, Cricket Day kid, get this, okay? If there was a record of pressure change, guess whose job it was to monitor that and ultimately make it, you know, silence it, make it go away, make it where there's no attention drawn to it. Nicole Kessinger, she was the subcontracted to Anadarko from another company, but her entire job was safety and moderation because a few months, maybe close to a year prior to this incident, there was the Firestone incident, which was where it was Anadarko's fault and their employees, and there was a big explosion, and people lost their lives and they got sued. So Nicole's job existed for the mere fact because of that. It was kind of like this concept of OSHA, they're going to come in and make sure they're monitored and doing the stuff that they should have been doing anyway, but now they have to because, people got hurt and died. Okay, well, riddle me this. Chris just so happened to, strangely enough, bump up Shannan, Bella, and Cece's life insurance all the way up to max. Okay. Also, there's been buzz about the connections with Nicole to higher ups in the Anadarko, with CEOs, COOs. Jim has connections to the oil company, not Anadarko, but he works for another oil site. They both went to geology school together, whatever that is, and then ended up in the oil field. Anyways, I digress from that. But she calls Jim every time she talks to Chris. She gets off the phone with Chris, she calls Jim. It's almost like she's reporting back to him, is what, I'm, in my opinion, allegedly, this is all my opinion. But it almost makes you think that they were all involved in it to an extent. I don't think that anybody but Chris and Nicole might have necessarily knew that it was going to involve killing his family. But I think there was people involved at the oil company, and they were supposed to, let's just say, if you knew how to prevent a kaboom, wouldn't it be safe to say that if you took the steps and reversed them, that you could cause a kaboom, if you get what I'm saying? Because then, boom, the big wigs at Anadarko get payouts, and then not only does Chris get a payout for, he's a grieving, widowed, poor husband that gets a life insurance for his family, because I think that he was so bold about that night when Shannan came home, she was on a mission. He charged that charge to their joint bank account when they went out to dinner, him and Nicole, and she was suspicious and she was coming to confront him about it. I think Chris did that on purpose. I think he did that so that he could paint the illusion that they were fighting and that she was aware of his affair. I think he planned to make it look like she loaded the girls up and came and confronted him at work, and then when she got there was just a freak kaboom, and then now he's rid of all of it. I think the only thing that stopped that plan from coming to fruition was Shanann changing her phone password on the ride home, on the plane ride home, and it changed it to the new baby's due date, and Chris didn't know it, so therefore could not get in her phone, couldn't create the back and forth banter like she's confronting him and I'm on my way, and then that's when the panic set in. And I think that's my opinion, but I digress.
DA Rourke reveals far more than I imagine he ever intended, and how important a role that case was about to play in a crime that had yet to be committed. District Attorney Michael Rourke begins to describe what started his involvement with the Sandoval case, giving us important insights into the perspective, mindset, and motivations of a prosecutor.
In about 2009, I got a call from Detective Mike Prill from the Greeley Police Department, who's one of my very good friends and the best investigator on the planet. And he used the name John Sandoval for the first time, and he said, "Are you aware that our department has been looking at the Sandoval case again, and we want you to take a look at it?" And I didn't really know what he was talking about. Despite what Kim had just said, in the 5 years that I had been in the office, I hadn't really heard about this case.
Until this moment, I wasn't previously aware of the close relationship between Detective Michael Prill and District Attorney Rourke. In fact, during my research, I noticed in his campaign contributions that his friend Michael Prill helped financially support his efforts to maintain his role as the county DA. But later in this episode, DA Rourke begins to discuss in more detail when Detective Prill met with him concerning the prosecution of John Sandoval.
Again, fast forward to 2009.
So I'm not even going to go because it's going to get real political and real. I tend to not. I'm going to hold my tongue this time.
9, they present this case to us and say, "Look, this case needs to be prosecuted. We know he did it. We don't have a crime scene. We don't know a murder weapon. We don't know how she's killed, but we know she's dead. There's been no contact with her for 14 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so after that presentation, my trial partner and I, Matt Malaro, spent a lot of time talking about it, and we decided to try it, to make an effort to prosecute that case. We both left that presentation without a doubt in our minds as prosecutors that he's the one that's responsible for this.
DA Rourke provides an incredible amount of information about the history of this case, specifically what the Greeley Police Department knew about the potential location of where John Sandoval had disposed of Tina's remains. Information that we learn that law enforcement knew in the mid-1990s. And you are going to want to pay very close attention to what you're about to hear, because these details are about to become paramount in the eventual outcome of a case that has a shocking and unexpected ending.
So let me put what I'm about to describe in context. As part of our investigation leading up to trial, we knew that law enforcement, the Greeley Police Department, had looked at the possibility that Sandoval may have secreted her remains in a local cemetery.
The Greeley Police Department already had a very specific suspicion of where Sandoval likely hid the remains of Tina during those 5 hours that he was unaccounted for. But law enforcement wasn't just shooting in the dark, because what they knew over a decade before John Sandoval was charged with first-degree homicide is information that was far more specific than anyone could have even begun to imagine.
As part of our investigation leading up to trial, this was back in maybe the early 2000s with the advent of a local group called Necrosearch, who's responsible for, or who are a group of volunteers of all different specialties who go out and try to find clandestine grave sites. They volunteer their time, they volunteer their equipment, they come in and testify when necessary, but they had looked at the possibility that Sandoval had buried or hid Tina's remains in a local cemetery. They went so far as to know through their investigation that the night Tina disappeared, there were 3 open graves that had been dug for funerals in the day or two after her disappearance. We also knew from that investigation that if there was a mourning burial, So we're talking about the morning of October 20th of 1995. The afternoon and evening of the 19th, the grave would have been dug, and they would have put at the bottom of that grave a concrete pad that ultimately the casket would be lowered onto, a concrete vault would be put over the top of, and then the burial would occur. If it was an afternoon burial, they wouldn't put that concrete pad into the bottom of the grave until the morning of service, the burial. They looked into that possibility. They investigated it to the extent they could. And so we knew what 3 graves were open.
So let's review. Law enforcement already suspected that John Sandoval hid his wife's remains in just one of the 3 grave sites that he had access to on the night that he was missing for 5 hours. Additionally, law enforcement had access to this company, NecroSearch, who, as we heard, will not only donate their time, but also their equipment for free in an effort to assist law enforcement in retrieving the remains of a missing person. So my next logical question was, what exactly did NecroSearch find when they were brought in to search the 3 grave sites? Well, DA Rourke is about to tell us.
We had taken one last swing, for lack of a better word, at the command staff at Greeley PD when we were getting ready for trial and said, can we have NecroSearch go out and do ground penetrating radar to see if we can find something underneath one of those graves? And I remember the investigations lieutenant looking at me and said, you all committed to trying this case as a no-body homicide. I don't have the manpower or the resources, financial resources, to do that at this point, so we're not going to do it. So we didn't do it.
So District Attorney Michael Rourke has just told us that he waited just before the trial of John Sandoval to ask the Greeley police lieutenant for permission to use NecroSearch and their ground-penetrating radar to look under the concrete pad of the 3 possible locations where Tina's remains could be. And the response was that it wasn't in the budget? Now, I will admit I am not a law enforcement professional, nor have I ever been, but I'm confused. What budget exactly? Didn't we just hear that NecroSearch donates their time and equipment for free? Well, maybe I'm being too harsh, and maybe I just don't understand law enforcement's methods or tactics, and it won't ultimately matter once they go to trial. And sure enough, in 2010, after a month-long jury trial with 137 witnesses testifying, the jury would deliberate for just 7 hours before returning a verdict against the defendant, John Sandoval, finding him guilty as charged in the indictment. And their sentence? Life in prison without the possibility of parole. Game over, right? Justice served. The DA's conviction percentage is maintained, and everyone can rest easy at night knowing that this monster John Sandoval is off the streets and is safely locked away in prison for the rest of his life. I mean, sure, it's a tragedy that they were unable to recover Tina's remains, but in our society, we are taught that this is justice enough, that sometimes this is the best we can hope for, and that this is where justice and the case ultimately ends. If only that were true. Because just 6 years later, the Colorado Court of Appeals reviewed the appellate filing of John Sandoval, and in March of 2016, they handed down a 55-page opinion that would alter the course of justice in this case's history forever. And I urge you to pay very close attention to the words that DA Rourke is about to use, because they are about to matter more than you could possibly realize.
Fast forward to March of 2015. I'm now the elected DA for 2 months, and we knew that the case was working its way through the appellate courts in Colorado. I said 15, didn't I? 16. Yeah. Excuse me, March of 16. So I had been a DA for a year and 3 months. We had worked with the Colorado Attorney General's office to try to maximize what we thought was our potential of getting that conviction affirmed on appeal. And in March of 16, the Court of Appeals reversed his conviction, finding that there were several errors that occurred during his trial, which required him to have a new trial.
And they found that there were several errors? Now that sounds perfectly benign and rather unspecific, lacking any detail or specificity whatsoever. Because if you've spent any amount of time watching this channel, you already know that I had to find out exactly what the appellate court's opinion actually said. I had to know what procedural reasons 3 appeals court judges could possibly have to remand a conviction and force a new jury trial, especially based on nothing more than several errors. In the United States of America, a vast majority of appeals filed within the criminal justice system are largely unsuccessful, and the number of cases that are reversed and remanded back to the lower court for a retrial are smaller still. So it seems rather odd to me that the Honorable District Attorney Michael J. Rourke would characterize the appeals court ruling as being based on nothing more than procedure and error. So I started to search to see if I could find the appellate court's opinion anywhere, and I was unpleasantly surprised at the sheer lack of coverage about a ruling so considerable. So I contacted the Colorado Court of Appeals and obtained a copy of their opinion, and what I found on the pages of that ruling flies in the face of a descriptor so asinine and insignificant as mere errors. Because what I read on those pages proved to me beyond a shadow of a doubt that our justice system and those who are given the power to enforce it, they are in dire need of change.
Bam! HelloFresh. HelloFresh is America's #1 meal kit. Every box comes pre-portioned, freshly packed, straight to your door. So HelloFresh saves our family so much time. We just choose what we want. Everything is already pre-portioned, packed, fresh, delicious. You guys, look at this. We got
Who is responsible for making the decision to charge someone with a crime? Over the years, I've heard a multitude of answers from people. From the arresting officer, maybe the senior officer in command at the scene, or even the chief of police. I've heard some people say that it's a random person in the prosecutor's office, with some people still believing that the victim themselves is ultimately who decides whether or not charges are brought forward against an offender. But none of those answers are correct. Here's the stark reality of the criminal justice system within the United States of America. With very few exceptions, there is just one single person who makes the decision to file charges against an offender for a criminal action. And for a vast majority of us, that person is the district attorney. On July 20th, 2020, 18-year-old Grant Solomon was struck by his own vehicle in what was initially believed to be a tragic accident in the parking lot of a baseball training club in Gallatin, Tennessee. However, in the weeks that followed, a considerable amount of evidence arose, calling into question the nature of his death and putting an air of suspicion on the last and only person who was with Grant at the time of his supposed accident. Grant was the son of Aaron Solomon, a local celebrity who had worked as a radio and television personality, a man with very strong ties to key members of law enforcement, the media, local politicians, and other powerful officials who all just happened to be close-knit members of the same church. To make matters worse, it was revealed that Grant's sister Gracie had previously come forward with credible accusations against her father Aaron that implicated him in crimes against her that had the potential to land him in prison for years. Since Grant's death, the public has learned that Gracie had previously informed her older brother of the abuse. A brother who was fiercely protective of Gracie, and when he learned of the abuse that she had endured at the hands of their father, a short time later, Grant was dead. Despite a litany of information that has come out since Grant's untimely death, local law enforcement has refused to investigate the credible information that they have received against this pillar of their community. And despite a considerable amount of pressure from people wanting justice, the district attorney has outright declined any official investigation into Grant Solomon's death. In the United States, the choice to proceed with a criminal action is often decided by just one person. Someone who is just like you and me, with opinions, biases, viewpoints, and political inclinations that impact who they prosecute, and ultimately, who they do not. which is precisely why each of us have witnessed cases where a criminal action is never pursued, even when compelling evidence exists that a crime was committed. We are all told that power wielded by a district attorney when executed for the right reasons is the highest form of justice that we could ever hope for, resulting more often than not in a just outcome. But you don't have to look far to see an inordinate number of examples where that power is misused, resulting in disastrous outcomes. And there is almost no better example that I can give you than the case of John Sandoval. In March of 2016, the appellate court issued their ruling concerning Sandoval's appeal, remanding the case back to the lower court for a retrial. And the legal basis for why the appellate court granted his appeal is vitally important to understand. In the U.S. and in most first world countries, our judicial system is not decided on the weight of societal morality, but rather on the laws and rules created to protect those values. The rules and laws that exist within that system govern everyone, not just criminals, but law enforcement, attorneys, and even prosecutors. So even when we truly believe that someone is guilty on the basis of compelling circumstantial evidence, the law demands that we follow the rules and guidelines set forth throughout each and every state, county, and province. These rules and guidelines are a mechanism that protects each of us from unfair prosecution, wrongful convictions, and most importantly, ensuring that justice is just. So I was quite surprised to learn that the appeals court did not merely remand John Sandoval's case back to the lower court for a retrial due to some implied minor procedural errors, but in fact, they found that DA Michael Rourke had made inexcusable mistakes during the trial. Mistakes that included introducing evidence by an expert witness that he knew or should have known was completely and totally impermissible. And their findings of his mistakes were not solely from the testimony of this expert, but the court also found that DA Rourke made inexcusable mistakes during his opening and closing statements. Allow me to read just one small segment from the court's ruling. During closing arguments, the prosecution urged the jury to use the mathematical probability evidence as proof Sandoval murdered Tina Tor. DA Rourke stated the following to the jury, quote, "In 75% of intimate partner homicides, there has been previous stalking behavior. That's what the literature on domestic violence tells, and that's what the evidence in this case should tell you. Ladies and gentlemen, when you review all of the evidence, one thing should be very clear. Tina is deceased. She is no longer alive. She has not been since October 19th of 1995." Unquote. The proceeding is the appellate court's outlining for the legal basis of why DA Rourke erred during the trial of John Sandoval. And as we just heard, he effectively told the jury that because John Sandoval had previously stalked his wife, that there was a 75% statistical likelihood that he also committed her homicide. This is completely impermissible in a court of law by a prosecutor, and tragically for the Tornay family. DA Rourke either knew or should have known that the appeals court would consider this a violation outside of the bounds of what they would allow from any prosecutor representing the state. And you tell me if what the appeals court judges are about to say sounds like insignificant procedural errors to you. Quote, "The impact of the inadmissible expert offender behavior and statistical correlation evidence cannot be overstated, particularly when combined with both the numerous witnesses testifying to Sandoval's prior stalking behavior and the prosecution's closing argument." As noted, the prosecution highlighted the expert's testimony and linked it to the prior bad acts to suggest Sandoval's guilt based on a mathematical probability. This invited the jury to consider that because there was a statistical connection between individuals who are stalkers and individuals who commit homicides, that there was a high mathematical probability that Sandoval was guilty of murder and a low probability that he was not guilty because of his past behavior. Unquote. One of the many things I have learned in my years of working with and around experienced litigators who routinely try cases in front of judges and juries is the deep and well-versed knowledge that they have of the law. DA Michael Rourke knew exactly what the law stated. He knew exactly what he was allowed to do and what he was not allowed to do. He has been a supervisor of other prosecutors for over 2 decades, teaching and managing what those assistant DAs do within their own docket of cases. I truly believe that he knew that he wasn't allowed to present this kind of evidence, but that he seemingly believed that the guilt of John Sandoval somehow outweighed his need to operate within the guidelines of the justice system. This case lacked any of the hallmarks of evidence that prosecutors typically have, and instead of relying on the jury to make the just and right decision, he overstepped the rules that govern all lawyers. And I suspect that there is a very specific reason why he chose to overstep the line in the Sandoval case.
So what I heard you say is that you really became emotionally and personally involved in this case.
Mm-hmm.
And I know when I worked in law enforcement, one of the things that we very often are told is that you can't get emotionally involved in these cases because honestly, if you do, it just drags you down and you wouldn't make it. But what I have experienced and what I have heard you say that it seems like you have experienced is the cases in which you tend to inadvertently get the most emotionally involved in, they become personal. They also open you up to the most trauma.
Sure.
Yeah.
DA Michael Rourke is a human being, and for the record, I don't believe that he is a bad person. I believe he's like each and every one of us, fallible and capable of making mistakes. But as we just heard, he admits that he gets deeply emotionally involved in the cases that he prosecutes. And in that same segment, we hear him being reminded that as a representative of law enforcement, one of the first things they learn is to not become emotionally attached to the outcome of a case. Precisely because those emotions can blind you from doing your job. Closely attached to our emotions is our ego. And sometimes one of the hardest things we can do as human beings is admitting when we're wrong. And I believe that's precisely what went wrong with DA Rourke's handling of Nicole Kessinger. That he became so emotionally attached to ensuring that Chris Watts was convicted that that singular outcome was the only thing he saw. And it's ultimately why he and his colleagues missed the overwhelming signs that their own witness was lying and repeatedly demonstrating that she had something to hide. But the mistakes that DA Rourke made during the first trial of John Sandoval would only pale in comparison to the unmitigated catastrophe that was about to happen next.
What's up, affiliate marketers? How you doing? Michael Baschi here. Now, really quick, listen, I know you don't want to be here. I know
Sandoval was a prolific jail call maker. He was on phones all the time. And so one of the first things we did, knowing that we were going to have to retry this case, was I had Detective Prill go to the Colorado Department of Corrections and get downloads of every phone call he had made while he was in prison. And we walked into our trial courtroom in early 16, and the judge said, "When can you all be ready for trial again?" And this was kind of calculated on our part. We made the record in front of the judge that, we're getting additional evidence. The defense is going to have to review it, but we have gotten every jail call he's made in the past 6 years that we're going to be reviewing, and the defense is going to need to review as well.
Prior to my investigation of the Watts case, I had no previous knowledge about the John Sandoval trial. So by this point of listening to the podcast, I was deeply invested in the outcome of his second trial. I was hopeful that despite the mistakes that the DA made in the first trial, that he would right the ship and use his leverage that he had just generated by informing the defendant that he was about to go through all 6 years of his prior phone calls. DA Rourke had started the beginning of this new trial wisely, making a calculated decision that could result in obtaining evidence of Sandoval admitting to the crime during his incarceration. It was a strong opening chess move, and frankly, I was impressed. But I couldn't help but wonder, now that the case was remanded back to the lower court for a new jury trial, and he was the DA, why wouldn't he have used that opportunity to utilize the knowledge they already had about Tina's likely clandestine burial site? Why not use the ground-penetrating radar on any one of the 3 grave sites that they already believed she was in and bring Tina home? Well, I was about to have that question answered in spades.
This was kind of calculated on our part. We made the record in front of the judge that, we're getting additional evidence. The defense is going to have to review it, but we have gotten every jail call he's made in the past 6 years that we're going to be reviewing, and the defense is going to need to review as well. And so we set the case out for a status conference several months down the road. And the next day I got a phone call from Sandoval's attorney, and she said, I have information from my client that the Greeley Police Department and your office and the Tournay family is probably going to want to hear. And I said, is he finally going to tell us the location of her body? And she said, perhaps. So the next day, or maybe later that afternoon, the defense attorney came over to my office, and basically we worked out an agreement where I obviously had to talk to Tina's family, but if we could reach a resolution that would involve him pleading guilty to a certain number of years, he would reveal the location of Tina's body.
Now, you might be tempted to think that this is a victory. John Sandoval, a man who has already been convicted for the homicide of Tina Tournay, is offering the family closure by telling them where she is. And in exchange for this information that the family clearly wants, he leverages a plea deal that will give him a lesser charge. But there's just one little problem with this entire exchange. DA Rourke has John Sandoval backed into a corner and is one move away from checkmate. Let's think about this for a moment. The DA has told the defendant in open court that he's about to go through all of his phone records from the prior 6 years of his incarceration. And less than 24 hours later, John Sandoval's defense attorney calls, offering information concerning Tina's burial location. And in exchange for that information, he is strong-arming the DA into taking first-degree homicide off the table, which makes it completely obvious that those phone call recordings likely had him dead to rights and would have given the prosecution the evidence that they needed to secure a second and final conviction against John Sandoval, guaranteeing that he would never leave prison and that he could never harm anyone ever again. Moreover, the DA already knows where John likely disposed of her remains, in a cemetery in only one of 3 possible grave sites. So why in the world would DA Rourke just give up and offer this scumbag a plea deal when he has these 2 clear avenues to ensure that Sandoval doesn't ever get out of prison? Well, I'll let him tell the story.
So imagine the phone call that I had to make to the Tournay family about what I just described to you. And within a day or two, Mom, Dad, 5 sisters were all in my office. Tina had 2 brothers who live on the East Coast. They were both on the phone. And there was not unanimity amongst that family about what to do. But I remember Tina's mom looking at me, leaning in towards me, and she said, I want you to do whatever it takes to get my daughter back. And it feels much like we had to make a deal with the devil, because we did. The agreement ultimately was he would plead guilty to second-degree murder, which is a lesser offense in Colorado, for, I think the agreement was 25 or 27 years in the Department of Corrections, but it mandated him telling us where Tina's body was found.
And it feels like we had to make a deal with the devil. What a truly horrific position to be forced into as a mother. Your daughter has been missing and assumed dead for decades, and all you want to do is bring her home. But instead of DA Rourke doing the right thing, it would seem that he was more concerned with saying that he got his conviction and saved the county the cost of another trial, because the plea deal was accepted and you are not going to believe what's about to happen next.
Increase your profit and work less time with Kittle, a genius new AI tool which is perfect for print on demand. You can conquer any niche you choose. All you need is a good idea, which Kittle will help you bring to.
The agreement ultimately was he would plead guilty to second-degree murder, which is a lesser offense in Colorado, for, I think the agreement was 25 or 27 years in the Department of Corrections, but it mandated him telling us where Tina's body was found. This is the surreal part. He takes us, he's in the Weld County Jail, he gets checked out by law enforcement and drives us directly to that cemetery that I was talking about earlier. And he wanders around in part of the cemetery for a bit to orient himself, and finally walks over and stands over the grave of a man who very clearly on his headstone was a World War II veteran. And he said, "She's under that."
When I listened to this podcast for the first time, I genuinely could not believe that this case had not become national news. A district attorney moves forward with the prosecution on a case absent of critical evidence that he could have obtained through the donated resources of NecroSearch, but instead chooses to proceed to trial, running roughshod over the rules of ethics and criminal procedure, not to mention the myriad of laws that are in place to protect all defendants. And because of the mistakes that he made, he opened the door to the appellate court's ruling, allowing John Sandoval to win that appeal. Then DA Rourke allows that same man to force a plea deal in exchange for information that law enforcement already knew. And here's the worst part of it all. Per trial testimony and sworn statements of direct witnesses, John Sandoval has an established and known history of obsessively stalking and harassing dozens of women. He has been implicated and accused of countless crimes against women, including his confession in open court that he committed the homicide of Tina Tor. And because of the egregious mistakes that were made in this case, John Sandoval, the convicted murderer, will be leaving prison because of the plea deal offered to him by the Honorable District Attorney Michael J. Rourke. A plea deal that ensures that on October 16th of 2029, less than 6 years from now, John Sandoval will leave prison. Oh, and just wait till you hear how this story is about to end.
And finally walks over and stands over the grave of a man who very clearly on his headstone was a World War II veteran. And he said, "She's under that." Obviously, we had done our homework leading up to that. That was one of the 3 graves that was open that night. That was the only grave that had an afternoon burial, so the concrete pad hadn't been put in the bottom of that gravesite yet. I gotta tell you, that was such an amazing son and daughter-in-law. Within an hour of our phone call, they said, "We will do whatever we can do to help you." They were at I can't remember if it was the sheriff's office or the police department in Laramie, Wyoming, signing a consent to have their father, his grave, exhumed so we could get underneath that grave. That happened the next day. NecroSearch was out there, and about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we found Tina's remains.
Yes, you heard that right. The whole time, law enforcement knew that Tina Tor was likely buried beneath the very same grave she was found under. And the one and only reason that DA Rourke provides for why they didn't use the donated time and resources of NecroSearch was because of budgetary constraints. What was so incredibly shocking to me about listening to this podcast is the entire time that DA Rourke tells this story, you could very clearly hear that it never occurs to him that he did a single thing wrong. We never hear a candid moment where he admits to any personal or professional shortcomings related to his prosecution of John Sandoval. And I honestly and genuinely believe that he cannot even conceive that he could have done anything differently, which is precisely the problem and is the exact same mentality that seemed to permeate the Chris Watts case. It's the exact same attitude and egotistical response that he provided to anyone who has ever questioned his investigation of Nicole Kessinger, or the lack thereof, I should say. It's as though he genuinely believes that anyone who questions him is nothing more than an ignorant bystander advocating for a witch hunt. But in their podcast episode, after finishing his story about the Sandoval matter, they pause for a commercial break, and the podcast shifts to another infamous case that he handled right after the Sandoval case ended. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Please place your tray tables in the upright position and make sure to tighten your seatbelts. We're about to go through some considerable turbulence. On November 7, 2018, NBC published the following article regarding the national news that had broke concerning Chris Watts accepting a plea deal that would give him life in prison in exchange for avoiding death row. The article quotes District Attorney Michael Rourke concerning the decision to offer Chris a plea deal that would undeservedly spare his life. But it's what DA Rourke says in this article that will likely sound familiar to those who have already studied this case. Rourke said at a press conference that the plea deal was made with the support of Shannan's family, and after he explained what he called the extraordinary delays that currently exist in Colorado with regard to the death penalty, he stated,
I hope I'm saying this accurately. I know they'll correct me if I am wrong, but they were very strongly in favor of a resolution in this case short of the death penalty.
Rourke was referring to his conversation with Shannan Watts' mother, Sandra Ruszczyk. He went on to say,
the steps in the process that I felt like were due diligence in order to come to this decision. I don't think any elected district attorney ever wants to have to make a decision about whether or not to seek the death penalty as it relates to an individual. But when I have a family who has been so incredibly supportive and so incredibly firm in their belief that the death penalty not be sought, I don't know how I would have said to them, I'm going to do it anyway. Sandy said it very, very poignantly to me. She said, he made the choice to take those lives. I do not want to be in a position of making the choice to take his. And so that's about as firmly as she could have said it to me. And that was very compelling to all of us as we were talking about how to proceed on this case.
Since November 7th, 2018, that has been the story that we have always been told, that it was the parents of Shannan who quite literally saved Chris Watts' life, which is why what you are about to hear is so incredibly and extremely disturbing.
Steve Wren, my chief deputy, and I flew to North Carolina and went to Shannan's parents' house to sit down with them in their living room to talk to them about the process, what they wanted to see happen, the realities of death penalty litigation in Colorado. And that's just not something you can have a conversation over the phone about. Ultimately, the outcome of that was a split. I mean, one parent wanted the death penalty. The other, Shannan's father, wanted us to make sure that this defendant never saw the light of day. And ultimately, he did plead guilty to everything we charged him with in exchange for not seeking the death penalty.
District Attorney Michael Rourke has just completely altered the narrative that he's told for the last 5 years. And he did this just 8 months ago on his wife's true crime podcast. And now he's stating that Sandra Ruszczyk did want the death penalty and that he had to convince her that it would be a waste of time because of Colorado's governor being a Democrat. Since posting this series in August of this year, I have received hundreds of comments from people telling me that my advocacy for justice in this case is wrong. I have received hundreds of emails and comments from people chastising me for having talked about this case at all. And yet here we have the DA who's responsible for the prosecution of this case literally changing the narrative that has always been that Sandra Ruszczyk was the one who effectively saved Chris Watts' life, only to now tell the world that in fact she was the one who wanted him on death row. And just in case you aren't sold that we have a problem in Weld County, Colorado, listen to how this DA describes his power as the sole shot caller for doling out justice in Weld County.
I know that we're contemplating seeking the death penalty, and as the elected DA, that's my decision. That's not anybody else's. I'm going through a process of talking to law enforcement, community leaders, my own commissioners for budget reasons, her family, like I talked about, senior leadership in my office, and my wife, because there's a recognition that this is the ultimate decision I have to make.
Your wife helps you to make the decision for whether or not to pursue the death penalty? Is it starting to make sense why I believe there should be a vote of no confidence in Weld County for this DA? But before you answer that, listen to what DA Rourke says in response to his wife and her co-host asking him if he is in fact a fan of any specific true crime content.
Because this is Survivor's Guide to True Crime, we have to know. Do you listen to true crime podcasts?
I do not. I don't. In all seriousness, I don't. And Kim knows the answer to this. I don't come home and read true crime books. I don't come home and read fictional stories about crime or those kinds of things. But the other reason, I don't know from a prosecutor standpoint if the true crime story that's being put out has been authorized by the victim or if the victim has participated. And if it hasn't, I am not going to consume that out of respect for that victim and his or her choices. And yeah, I'm just not going to do it because I'm not going to allow someone to monetize a victim's suffering for my own entertainment value.
So the Honorable District Attorney Michael Rourke doesn't even listen to content that is monetized or that is absent of the permission of the victims. And remember, he said that because it's about to become very relevant. Now let's listen to how he sets up his discussion about Chris Watts and what he specifically refuses to do related to that case.
So one case in particular, I know a lot of people are going to know. So I want you to talk about it because it's one of your most memorable cases.
Just don't make me say his name.
All right.
Because I refuse to do that. I refer to this now as the Frederick homicide case, triple homicide.
Yeah. And honestly, I don't think that it is necessary to say offenders' names.
What I find so incredibly amusing about this tirade is that this same elected official mere minutes before had no problem saying the name John Sandoval over and over and over again. But the second he starts talking about Chris Watts, he now refuses to use or say his name. In fact, both him and his wife proceed to lecture us about how we shouldn't use the name of the offenders from these cases at all. He goes on to say that he won't even listen to a video that is linked to a creator who hasn't received permission from the victim or anyone who has any form of monetization on their platform. Okay, so then I have a question. Did DA Michael Rourke get the permission of the Rooscheks and the Tournays to discuss their cases? Did he contact Sandra Rooschek and ask her if he had permission to change the narrative of the entire story that has ever been told prior to going on to his wife's true crime podcast? Because I very seriously doubt that she appreciates him changing the story in such a drastic way after half a decade of telling the world that she was the one to advocate for Chris to get the plea deal and for him not to go on to death row. And I couldn't help but notice pontificating about how he won't even listen to true crime content that is monetized, that he makes these same statements in the exact same episode that this occurs.
Bam! HelloFresh. Guys, shrimp spaghetti with a kick is what we're gonna make. You guys know that HelloFresh makes cooking dinner easy, fun, and affordable? Let's do this.
But did you know that it's also Adaptogen April?
Say what?
Do you know what an adaptogen is, Kim?
I understand all of those words separately.
So adaptogens are essentially some type of compound, botanical, that goes into your body and helps your body deal with stress.
So let's be clear. It's completely okay for the DA and his wife to go onto a podcast where they read a paid advertisement while speaking about Chris Watts and changing the narrative about Shannan's mother, but when anyone else does it, that's unethical. Now, you may recall at the start of this episode, I told you that DA Michael Rourke has a message for each and every one of you. All of the concerned citizens who have pleaded with him and his office to open an investigation into Nicole Kessinger, to examine the mountain of evidence that they chose to ignore. Well, listen closely, because the next few minutes are his message to you.
The demand from the public, once his case was resolved, for open and complete access, either through Criminal Justice Records Act, FOIA requests. In Colorado, it's called the Colorado Open Records Act, was crushing. I have an office of 80 employees, and I bet if we would have done this any other way, all 80 of my employees would have been responding to nothing but these requests. So we had to make the choice of making the files that we would release public available on our website, office website, through a program called ShareFile, where people could simply request it, they'd get the link, and they could download it, they could sit at home and read. The number of people that have done that is stunning. We are talking multiple tens of thousands of downloads worldwide of this horrific crime that I have described. I also have seen, from my perspective, the number of people who have wanted to play junior detective.
Yep.
They want to play junior detective. They want to second guess charging decisions. They want to second guess whether or not the offender is truly guilty. They want to second guess the sentencing determination that I had to make. And in this one, in my description earlier, I didn't share this piece, but at the same time, we knew through the course of our investigation that the defendant was having an affair with somebody that he had met at work. And there was the significant belief by many that she played a role in this murder. The most recent email I have gotten demanding that I reopen the investigation and prosecute her for murder, I received last week. I bet conservatively we have gotten 5,000 or 6,000 emails demanding the same thing, questioning the very decision-making process that we had gone through without having all the information. We get phone calls from people who say, I want you to justify or articulate why you made this decision. And I'm not going to do that. I just refuse. It's gotten to the point where about 2 years ago, I finally decided I'm not doing any more interviews. I'm not doing any more documentaries. I'm not doing any made-for-TV movies, nothing. I have got to get out of talking about this particular case.
You can so clearly hear his disdain for all of the people who have ever taken interest in this case, his constituents. The people that live and work and operate in his county, the people who just want justice, not for their own self-promotion or vain ambition, but because it's just the right thing to do. Because so many of us believe that justice truly matters. And when you have that much evidence that this witness should have been investigated properly as a potential suspect or as a person of interest, it goes beyond ego. And it strikes at the very heart of why we advocate for justice, which is exactly the purpose of a district attorney. But after thousands of people have contacted his office, countless emails of people practically begging him to finish what he started, the Honorable District Attorney Michael J. Rourke has a very clear answer to every person still advocating for Shannan, for Bella, for Cece, and for Nico.
And so, for clarity, that avenue has been investigated. It is closed. Period. That's it.
Period.
So stop asking about it.
Stop asking about it. She didn't have anything to do with it. She wasn't there that morning. She voluntarily cooperated with law enforcement. She provided us all the information. I'm not going to tell you where she's at. Stop. Leave me alone.
So leave her the hell alone. Leave y'all alone about it. Leave her alone. Absolutely
But
not.
she didn't do it. She had nothing to do with it. Leave her alone.
And this is just one of the many reasons I left my legal career behind. While I had the pleasure of working with some truly exceptional people over the years, far too often I had the displeasure of working with people just like DA Michael Rourke. People who believed that their high conviction rate, their accolades, and all of their achievements make their view of the law and of the world around them immune to criticism. Some of the most egotistical and arrogant people I have ever met in the entirety of my life occupy places of power exactly like this. People who genuinely believe that they are so far above scrutiny that their ego doesn't even allow them to consider that anything they do, have done, or will ever do is deserving of anything less than praise and admiration. Because the sheer volume of people who have expressed interest in this case, That's not an indicator to them that maybe something could have been done better or more thoroughly, but rather that every person interested in the pursuit of justice is nothing more than a nuisance. But DA Rourke wasn't even close being done addressing each of you yet. Here's his take on what you can expect from him concerning the justice system.
And so what I would say is rely on the criminal justice system to do the things that we are vested with doing, which is trying to hold accountable the offenders who commit these crimes. We're not going to hold everybody accountable. We're going to miss some sometimes.
Yeah.
But you're right. Don't look to us to solve every problem. You're right. I can't, and we can't, as law enforcement, solve all of the world's problems and try to put victims back in the position prior to their victimization, because that's just impossible.
We're not going to hold everybody accountable are the words that are spoken by a man who made a deal with the devil, ensuring that John Sandoval will leave prison in less than 6 years. Oh, and he has one last thing to tell you before he's done.
What I really want to say, let's be honest. What I really want to say is quit being jerks. Quit trying to think that you on your couch behind an anonymous keyboard knows better than those of us who are professionals in the field, who are always going to ascribe to us a motive to do something that is unethical, immoral, or illegal. Quit trying to think that you know better than we do because you have some preconceived notion about law enforcement or prosecutors.
One of the most tragic elements of this entire diatribe is the fact that I don't think he understands that the concern shown by so many people about the Watts case is not out of trying to tell law enforcement what to do. We simply see that there was more that could have been done, and discounting the authenticity of our advocacy only emboldens that viewpoint. No matter how much he may want this, you cannot wish this case away. You cannot instruct people to stop caring about Shannan and her children. However, I do want to be clear. I actually agree with DA Rourke that the people who attack the victims in this case are subhuman, and they do not deserve any attention, views, or a following. No one has the right to attack or demean the memory of Shannan, and I do not care what your reasoning is. She did not deserve the horrific nightmare that was brought upon her by her cheating coward of a husband. But you cannot expect the public to hear the multitude of lies pouring out of the mouth of Nicole Kessinger and simultaneously expect those same people to ignore it by saying that you've done your job. That is not only unreasonable, but it's a literal recipe for guaranteeing the overwhelming interest in this case, especially in light of the fact that law enforcement's own evidence definitively shows that they did not complete their own investigation. And by virtue of that fact, it will only force this case to remain at the forefront of those advocating for justice, if needed, for decades to come. Because the unfortunate reality is, the professionals in the field, specifically District Attorney Michael Rourke, someone who claims to know better, he failed Tina Tor and her entire family. And many of us now see